Alright, welcome back guys. So in this video I'm going to cover the general cost of how much it's going to be to do an S54 swap and an E36. Alright guys, welcome back. So this is going to be my broad overview of how much I personally spent doing an S54 swap and my E36. And drop in the comments what you guys think my overall cost is. No cheating on it. I want to see what your guys' guess on that is, and it's probably less than you guys think, honestly. So let's get into it. Alright, so starting out with the engine, I'm using my old iPhone as my notes, and for starting out, we got the S54 engine, which was included with the harness, DME, and fuel pressure regulator. I actually was able to pull it out of the E36 myself, so it was a little bit cheaper than what you would probably normally pay for S54. This one did have like 160,000 miles on it, so wasn't sure of the service history on it, wasn't sure if the rod bearings were ever done on it. So moving on down this list, you'll see that I did do a lot of the maintenance on it just to be preventative. Alright, so we got the base price for the engine, harness, DME, fuel pressure regulator, and I also forgot to mention that I got the aftermarket headers with that package, and that was $3,500. Moving on, since these are notorious for failure on S54, obviously I had to do the rod bearings on it. I went with the VAC coated rod bearings, made sure they're all spec'd, and that was $480. Moving on to Vanos, which is the second most common thing for failure on these engines. I wanted to make sure I did all the seals, timing guides, exhaust cam gear and shit. That came out to a total of $720, which is pretty expensive, but I mean, it's going to be more expensive if you don't do that and you end up screwing up your engine, but definitely recommend doing that. Moving on to something that wasn't necessary, but it was definitely necessary in my opinion, was the Turner CSL airbox. Wasn't cheap, I'm sure you guys are aware of that. For the CSL intake filter and intake air temp sensor, I paid $2,000 for it. And I mean, you're probably not making much horsepower off of that, but I mean, the big selling factor of that for me was the induction noise, and it's unrivaled to any other engine in my opinion. Like, the sound alone was worth the price, and I'm sure I got a couple horsepower out of that. But next up, I did the valve shims, which should be done every 30,000 miles on this, and since I wasn't sure of the service history of it, I wanted to make sure I got this thing perfectly dialed in. And honestly, out of the 24 valves, I probably had to do 5 of the shims in it, so not too bad. Alright, so next one, I add this into the engine category because it's kind of necessary for the whole procedure of doing like all the timing related stuff, and that's going to be the timing tools. So I spent a total of $170 for the OEM cam bridge alignment tool and also the TDC pin that locks into the crankshaft. Both those tools are absolutely necessary for you to do the whole procedure on the Vanos, so added that to the list. Moving on to like some maintenance related stuff. So I did the spark plugs, those were $85. Water pump and thermostat, that ended up being $225, which when I originally put the motor in, I didn't replace those. And after about 3 weeks to a month, the water pump failed on me. So should have done that in the first place, lesson learned, but $225, it wasn't too bad to do all that. Pretty easy procedure on it. Lastly, for the engine category, we have expansion tank and the pressure cap. So I actually got this off of Amazon for about $40. It is a Moroso knockoff. So far it's holding up just fine. I don't have any leaks from it, no problems at all. And then obviously the Moroso cap, no issues on that part. So nice little unit there. You get that off Amazon. I'll plug that in the link below. Alright, so far our cost on all that is $7,330, which you're probably like, that's most of the budget. I was expecting like $8,000, but we'll get to that. And now moving on to the drivetrain. So I retained the factory 5-speed ZF. They're super sturdy transmissions, and I didn't really want to mess with like doing the drive shaft or anything like that to adapt the 6-speed trans to it. Maybe down the road it would be nice to have that extra gear, but I mean, for now I was trying to keep it somewhat cost effective, and yeah, just keeping a ZF for right now. But I did upgrade the flywheel and did like a whole new clutch system on it. So starting out with the flywheel, I went with a JB Racing flywheel. I think it's like a 15-pound lightweight flywheel, single mass. That cost me $400. Next up to the clutch disc, I actually had to get a E34 M5 clutch disc to adapt to this whole S54 swap. That was $200. lastly, I got the E36 M3 pressure plate, 120 bucks. So since I was doing a whole new like fresh clutch setup, I did a slave cylinder that was 40 bucks. And since I didn't want to leave anything stock really, or anything old for that matter, I ended up going with a braided steel clutch line, another 40 bucks. So the whole drivetrain cost me around 800 bucks. Might have been a couple other little items I left out, but so far the total of that with the engine is $8,930. Alright, so now that everything is covered for the engine actually being mounted into the engine bay, the transmission's all bolted up, now I'm going to move on to fueling, which wasn't too bad. I had to get a upgraded fuel pump because the factory E36 one isn't going to flow enough for the S54, so I went with a Castle fuel pump. It's a plug-and-play unit, bolts right into the factory housing and all that shit, so that was 200 bucks. Part of the engine harness to get the fuel pump and all that working, actually had to buy a EKP fuel relay. That cost me 40 bucks off of eBay. Not too bad. I think they're like 100 bucks brand new, but I went the used route. It's holding up so far. Other than that, I just did a fuel filter, which was 25 bucks, so pretty cheap. Grand total of the whole fueling system was 265 bucks, which puts us at $9,195. Alright, so next moving on to wiring and electrical. So this is probably the most expensive and labor-intensive aspect to the whole swap, and starting out with the Redline adapter harness. So this is completely necessary to adapt like the chassis to communicate to the engine and have the whole system actually operate correctly. Yeah, you could probably try to figure out how to wire up your own, but I mean, for 450 bucks, it is a lot easier just to buy the whole harness and get that done. Again, that was through Redline, 450 bucks. Next up, we have a E46 gas pedal, since on the E36 it is drive-by cable. On the S54 it's drive-by-wire, so you actually had to adapt that to a electronic pedal, and luckily I had a homie that had one just laying around, shout out Hermes, so that was a free gas pedal on my end, so $0. Next up, I could have kept the factory cluster and had the factory rev limiter at like 7,000, but since this thing revs up to 83, I wanted to make sure to do the proper solution on it, and that was getting a Z3 CAN bus cluster, so I was able to find this off of eBay for 175 bucks, used obviously. From there, I wanted to adapt like the clown shoe style faces to that, and there was actually a company called Speedo Cluster Solutions. They sell the whole kit for 60 bucks. After you get both of those parts, you're gonna have to send it off to M Sport Parts, which does all the coding for that, so he adapts like the rev limiter to actually adapt to the 83 or 8,000 RPMs, whatever. And does a few other little things to make sure that the cluster is fail-proof, because there is a couple little like internal things that do fail on that. That was 425 bucks. Next up, we have the DME tuning. So I went with the Alpha N tune through HTE Tuning. He's the go for tuning. This thing made 320 wheel horsepower on 91 octane. Later I found out it actually had an exhaust leak, so probably could squeeze out a little bit extra, but I mean, 320 wheel horsepower when these things only made a 333 crank from factory, I'm more than happy with it. That tune ran me $400, which is surprising because most other Alpha N tunes are around like $1,000 bucks. And to tie into that, the dyno cost, some dude local to me, he only charged me 150 bucks for about 4 hours of tuning, so not bad from what I've seen other dyno tuners charge. Alright, so for all the wiring and electrical, that ran me a grand total of $1,660, and that puts us at a total of $10,855 so far, which is getting pretty steep. And moving next to, what do we got? Exhaust fluids and miscellaneous. So I built the whole exhaust myself out of a 3.5-inch stainless steel pipe. Originally I did have a resonator in the middle of it, but I eventually cut that out. So now I'm just running a catless system all the way back to a vibrant muffler. And for all the parts for that, all the piping, V-bands, muffler, that cost me about 600 bucks. Next, moving to fluid. So we're talking like oil, coolant, brake fluid, shit like that. It was around 170 bucks for all the fluids. Miscellaneous, so like and fittings and lines, just little bits and bobs here and there. I spent around 300 bucks. So for all that, I spent $1,070 for it, which puts us at a total of $11,925. Alright, so the grand total of me spending on this whole engine swap was right at 12,000 bucks, and that's pretty much on ballpark with what you guys are probably commenting and what you guys were guessing what it would cost. And that's before I put in the deduction. So obviously I had an engine in this car. I was able to sell that. It was an S52. I got $2,500 out of it. Next up, I had the stock E36 airbox, which since I went with the CSL one, I didn't need that anymore. I actually ended up selling that for 250 bucks. S52 DME, 150 bucks. And the old fuel pressure regulator, since I actually got the fuel pressure regulator off the S54 included in the whole package. So luckily for that, I was able to sell the old one for 100 bucks, which total deductions is $3,000. And if you do the math, how much I actually paid out of pocket after deductions was $8,925. So that's not too bad, in my opinion, for a full S54 swap with the CSO intake and all the custom work I've got done into it. So yeah, overall, the price wasn't too bad. I mean, like if I was going to LS swap, which is known to be like a cheap swap, it probably still would have been like $7,000, $8,000. So I mean, S54s are notorious for being an expensive swap, and I was able to get that done for about $9,000. So I'm completely happy with it, and I'm sure you guys are wondering, is it worth the cost? Was it worth all the hassle and all the money that he spent on it? And let me answer you, absolutely yes. Compared to the S52, this thing's making an extra like 100 horsepower, and with my chassis being as light as it is, it's probably around 2,500 pounds. This thing absolutely rips, and I couldn't really think of a better engine swap for this car. People often would say like LS swap it, you'll have more torque and shit, but for me, that's not what the M3 stands for. That's not really what I wanted to get out of it. Also could have went like a forced induction S52, but I mean, that kind of takes away from the overall character of it. And if any of you guys actually want to do the S54 swap, I 100% recommend doing it. So yeah, I hope I covered pretty much everything on that. That was the overall cost of how much it cost me personally to do the S54 swap in my E36. And yeah, there are a couple things you guys should do to add to the supporting mod. So like I already had like the diff, new bushings on that, reinforced. I did the 14 mil bolt upgrade on that. So I wasn't really worried about delivering the power to the whole drivetrain setup. That's been already covered on my case. Other things, radiators have already been replaced. With the engine, I actually did get the oil cooler and oil cooler lines on that. That did later end up failing on me, so I didn't really add that additional price for like the aftermarket oil cooler, all the hand lines and shit. That ended up being like $400 or $500. But so yeah, that's going to pretty much conclude this video. And I mean, if any of you guys have any questions about how to get this done, or if you guys are actually doing it yourself and you're getting hung up on the process, shoot me a message. I'm more than down to help any of you guys out. I feel like I have a pretty well understanding of how to get everything working right, what you should and shouldn't do, what parts to buy and shit like that. So that's all I got for this video, guys. Like, comment, subscribe. Until next time.